Let's get right into it. Number 5. The bull that roared with screams. Ancient Greece gave us philosophy, democracy, and apparently one of the most nightmarish inventions ever sketched into history. Perilos, a craftsman with more imagination than empathy, thought he'd found the perfect product market fit for tyrants. An execution device that doubled as entertainment. His creation was the brazen bull, a hollow bronze statue shaped like a bull, large enough to hold a prisoner inside. Underneath, a roaring fire. Inside, a living person slowly roasted, and the pièce de résistance. Clever acoustic tubing that transformed the victim's screams into the deep bellowing roars of a bull. If this sounds like a medieval death metal stage prop, that's basically what it was, minus the guitars and plus the smell of burning flesh. Perillus proudly presented his invention to King Phalaris, promising not just punishment, but a show. Cruelty rebranded as spectacle. Imagine the sales pitch. Not only will your enemies die, Your Majesty, but they'll do it with surround sound effects. But here's the kicker. The story takes a turn worthy of a Netflix dark comedy. The king, horrified, or maybe just suspicious of being played, asked for a demonstration. Naturally, he had Perilos himself test the device. Once the inventor was locked inside and the fire lit, the bull performed exactly as advertised. Only problem? The beta tester was also the creator. He barely escaped being cooked medium rare before being tossed off a cliff for good measure. The real lesson here isn't about fire safety or acoustics, it's about who you're building for. When your target audience is a despot, don't be surprised if you end up as your own guinea pig. Innovation without ethics isn't progress, it's just a fancier way to set yourself on fire. Number 4. The patent that never was. After barely escaping his own bull-shaped oven, Perilos might have thought, well, at least I proved it works. But history remembers him less as a visionary and more as the guy who accidentally booked himself a one-way trip into his own invention. And here's where the story gets a sarcastic twist. Some modern tellings joke that Perilos' real mistake wasn't building a torture chamber. It was failing to file a patent. Now imagine that for a second. Picture him marching into an ancient Athenian patent office. Yes, I'd like to legally own the rights to a screaming barbecue machine. Thank you. Even if paperwork existed back then, I doubt any clerk would stamp that one with approval. Because patents protect novelty, not morality. They say, this belongs to you, not, this is a good idea. But that's the comedy of innovation. People obsess over ownership more than impact. We're conditioned to think being first is everything, even if what you're first at is horrifying. The king didn't care about intellectual property. He cared about staying entertained and in control. And he showed exactly how much respect he had for Perilos' IP by throwing the poor guy off a cliff. The takeaway? Protection on paper doesn't protect you from reality. It's easy to get blinded by the chase for credit or recognition, but when you're dealing with powerful people or dangerous ideas, the rules aren't written in ink, they're written in fire. And Perilos, sadly, learned that lesson in the most literal way possible. Number 3. The skeleton that asks questions. Jump ahead to 1927, where technology had evolved from bronze statues to skeletons with light bulb eyes. Enter Helen Adelaide Shelby, a California woman who thought interrogations were too dull. Her solution? File a patent for a machine that turned questioning suspects into a horror show. Imagine stepping into a pitch-black room. A curtain lifts. Suddenly a skeleton stands before you, its eye sockets glowing red, its jaw wired with a megaphone. Out of its skull echoes a voice. Confess your crimes. Now Bricky. Was it a detective hiding behind the curtain? Nope. It was just Shelby's device, designed to spook criminals into blurting out the truth. On paper, it was part lie detector, part theatre production. In practice, it probably would have made suspects confess to stealing cookies just to get out of the room. And here's the thing, it almost makes sense. Religion had used fear for centuries to keep people honest, so why not let technology take a crack at it? Only difference is, priests didn't install megaphones in skeletons. The real question here is, does fear create truth or just panic? We know today that coerced confessions often backfire. People will say anything to make the terror stop. Shelby's idea was clever, but it confused compliance with honesty. That's the danger of innovation without psychology. You can build something impressive, but if it's aimed at the wrong target, it just becomes expensive theatre. Still, you have to admit, it's iconic. If nothing else, it proves one thing. Patents don't require sanity, only originality. And in that sense, Shelby was ahead of her time. Number 2, exploding coffins and graveyard grenades. Now let's drop into the late 1800s, a time when graveyards weren't peaceful resting places, but hotspots for supply chains. Why? Medical schools were desperate for cadavers, and grave robbing had become a booming black market industry. Families would bury their loved ones on Sunday, and by Tuesday, Uncle Henry was already lying on a dissection table downtown. Enter Philip K. Clover, an Ohio inventor, who apparently thought, if thieves want bodies, let's give them fireworks instead. In 1878, he patented the coffin torpedo, a gunpowder-packed device hidden under the coffin lid. If anyone pried it open, they'd trigger a shotgun blast or an explosion. Think of it as the 19th century version of a car alarm, except instead of a siren, it gave you shrapnel to the face. And it didn't stop there. By 1881, others filed for the grave torpedo, a literal landmine buried above the coffin. The marketing pitch was both chilling and poetic. Sleep well, sweet angel. A torpedo guards your rest. Romantic words for what was essentially a claymore in your grandmother's flower bed. Were these devices effective? Reports suggest yes. Some would-be grave robbers ended up being buried in the very plots they tried to plunder. But it also created a whole new set of problems. Imagine being a cemetery worker, lowering a casket while whispering, "Please don't trip the landmine." OSHA would have had a meltdown. The irony here is hard to miss. Inventions meant to protect the dead often endangered the living. Clover's idea might have solved a problem, but it did so by making graveyards resemble battlefields. Sometimes deterrent is just a polite way of saying, we turned funerals into minefields. Number 1. When childbirth became a carnival ride. Fast forward to the 1960s, when space exploration was taking off, technology was booming, and apparently someone decided childbirth needed centrifugal force. Enter George and Charlotte Blonsky, a couple with no children of their own, but plenty of confidence that they could fix labour. Their patent? The centrifugal birth device, basically a giant rotating table where an expectant mother would be strapped down and spun at speeds up to 7 Gs. The idea was simple. Let physics do the pushing. Picture it, a woman in labour. Arms stretched out on a cross-shaped table, spinning like she's in astronaut training while doctors stand by with a net to catch the baby. According to the patent, this would compensate for the weaker muscles of civilized women compared to so-called primitive women. Translation: a dash of science mixed with a hefty scoop of bad anthropology. Now 7 Gs is no joke. That's what astronauts endured re-entering Earth's atmosphere. So instead of a calm delivery room, you'd have a mother experiencing the forces of a fighter jet cockpit, with her newborn rocketing out like a fastball. Safety net or not, that's less miracle of life and more baseball pitching machine. Thankfully, the device was never built or used, though it did later earn an Ig Nobel Prize, the parody award for bizarre scientific achievements. And honestly, it deserved it. Because the Blonsky's spinning table from hell teaches us something. Not every problem needs a gadget. Sometimes the innovation is worse than the challenge it's supposed to solve. In the end, this wild ride reminds us of a bigger truth. Just because an invention is new doesn't mean it's necessary. Creativity without empathy can spin out of control, literally. That's all for today. I'll be making similar videos in the future. Subscribe to see them.